Before Marx, idealism played a dominant role in social science. The advent of historical materialism, and the core of which is the theory of social economic formation, had provided a truly scientific methodology for the studying of human societies. Following three rules must be observed in historical materialist analysis of human society in order to avoid falling into idealism and to ensure that a scientific and material-based methodology is practiced. First, the theory of social economic formation states that material production is the basis of social life, and that the mode of production determines the level of development of society, and thus, material production is also the factor which determines the development level of society and the general course of human history. Therefore, we must strictly avoid basing our studies of the development of human society primarily on the subjective thoughts, ideas, and the will of humans. We must instead focus on the development level of social production in general and the mode of production in particular, with the key. Oh my gosh, already? They don't like me. Jesus. These guys are all so fucking like wild, dude. Therefore, we must strictly avoid basing our studies on the development of human society primarily on the subjective thoughts, ideas, and the will of humans. We must instead focus on the development level of social production in general and the mode of production in particular, with the key is the development level of the productive forces when studying the historical development of any particular human community. Second, the theory of social economic formation also holds that society is not a random mechanical combination of individuals, but a living organism. Aspects of society exist in a closer, unified structural system, which interacts with each other. Within this system, the relations of production play a fundamental role, determining other social relations. It is an objective criterion which can be used to distinguish different social regimes. Therefore, to accurately explain society, it is necessary to use the scientific abstraction methodology. It is necessary to start from the material relations of production of the society in order to analyze various other aspects of that society, i.e., politics, law, culture, science, etc., and the mutual relationship between those aspects. Thirdly, socio-economic formation theory also holds that the motion and development of society is a natural historical process. That is to say, social development is a process that takes place according to objective laws and not according to human subjective will. Therefore, in order to properly understand and effectively solve social problems, it is necessary to study deeply the laws of motion and development of society. Lenin once emphasized that what Marx and Engels called the dialectical method as against the metaphysical is nothing else than the scientific method of sociology, which consists in regarding society as a living organism in a state of constant development and not as something mechanically concoctinated. Let me look up this word, everybody, real quick. Just make sure I get it right. This is the first word I have had problems with. Hold on a second. Concatenated, which is linking things, and therefore permitting all sorts of arbitrary combinations of separate social elements. An organism, the study of which requires an objective analysis of the relations of production that constitutes the given social formation and investigation of its laws and functioning and development. The three rules above, which are rooted in socio-economic formation theory together, constitutes the historical materialist methodology, which is the most general methodology in studying society, human history, and human communities. Therefore, the theory of social economic formation also refers to as social economic formation theory, or simply social formation theory, is so named because it is a theory which describes truth about how human society and economies form and develop over time. Social formation theory is a core of historical materialism, as it reflects the foundational role of dialectical materialist philosophy and historical materialism. Social formation theory, core theory in historical materialism, dialectical materialism applied to an analysis of human society, dialectical materialism, foundation of philosophy. Social formation theory is the core of historical materialism, which is the application of dialectical materialism to analysis of human society. Each rule of historical materialist mythology is derived from a principle of socio-economic formation theory. Each of these principles, in turn, reflects a foundational aspect of dialectical materialist philosophy. In order to ensure that historical materialist analysis is consistent with the underlying philosophical precepts of dialectical materialism and the principles of social formation theory, these rules must be closely followed. Okay, you're talking to somebody else. Thank you, Two-Spirit. The table below shows the relationship between dialectical materialist philosophy and principles of social formation theory and the rules of the methodologies of historical materialism. Note that each rule of historical materialist methodology reflects a principle of social formation theory, and that each of these principles, in turn, is grounded in the foundational aspect of dialectical materialist philosophy. Formation of dialectical materialism. And then you have on the top, I gotta look at it, sorry everybody. So right here, formation of dialectical materialism, principles of social formation theory, historical materialism methodology rules, and then the second, I'm gonna read all this, two principles of governed relationship, then down here, the principle of development. And all this right here is the formation of dialectical materialism and then the principles. So we're going to go over that. Okay. Foundations of dialectical materialism, number 1. Dialectical materialism, conception of relationship between matter and consciousness. Matter determines consciousness. The principal social formation theory. Material production is the basis of social life, and mode of production determines the level of development of society. And therefore, material production is also the factor which determines the development level of society and the general course of human history. Historical materialist methodology rule. We must strictly avoid basing our studies of the development of human society primarily on the subjective thoughts, ideas, and will of humans. We must instead focus on development level of social production in general and the mode of production in particular when studying the historical development of human society. 2. The principle of general relationships. All things, phenomena, and ideas exist in mutual relationships with each other, regulate each other, transform each other. Nothing exists in complete isolation. Society, and then the next category, of course, is principle social formation theory. Society is not a random mechanical combination of individuals, but a living organism aspects of society exist in a closely unified structural system, which interact with each other. Within this system, the relationship of production play a fundamental role determining other social relations. And then now we're back to historical materialism methodology rule. To accurately explain society is a necessary to use the scientific abstraction methodology. That is, it is necessary to start from the material relations of production of a society in order to analyze various other aspects of that society. 3. Principle of development. Development is a process that comes from within, thing in itself, the process of solving contradictions within things and phenomena. Therefore, development is inevitable, objective, and occurs without independence of human will. Then an exception, of course, is principle of social formation. The development of society is a natural historical process of social development that takes place according to objective laws and not according to human subjective will. And then the methodology of historical materialism. In order to properly understand the effectively solve social problems, it is necessary to study deeply the laws of motion and development in society. Following this explanation of each principle of social formation theory, its basis in dialectical materialism and its corresponding rules of historical materialism. Before I go on to principle 1, does anybody have any questions so far? I can try to answer them before I move on. Going to principle 1. Make sure you guys like and stuff just in case get another, All right, no one has any question. All right. Principle 1. Matter determines consciousness in human society. This principle of social formation theory is rooted in dialectical materialism conception of the relationship between matter and consciousness, which holds that matter determines consciousness, while consciousness can impact back upon matter. Since matter determines consciousness, it must follow that social being determines social consciousness, and that the material base determines the superstructure of society. As Marx wrote in his preface to the contribution of the critique of political economy, here he goes. The mode of production of the material life conditions the general process of social, political, and intellectual life. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but their social existence that determines their consciousness. This is the basis of the first rule of historical materialist methodology, which states we must strictly avoiding basing our study of the development of human society primarily on the subjective thoughts, ideas, and will of humans. We must instead focus on the development level of social production in general and the mode of production in particular when studying the historical development of human society. Principle 2. Society is an organism, a closely unified system of relationships. So they're repeating. It's okay. We're repeating. It's okay. This principle of social formation theory is rooted in the principles of general relationships of dialectical materialism, which holds that all things, phenomena, and ideas exist in mutual relationship with each other, regulate each other, transform each other, and that nothing exists in complete isolation. Human society can therefore be understood to be defined by internal and external relationships in the economic content of neurodism. Lenin explains how human society is thus formed as an organism of relations. I think this is another, according to Marx's theory, each such system is production relation is a specific social organism whose inception, functioning, and transitioning to a higher form, conversion into another social organism, are governed by specific laws. This is the basis of the second rule of historical materialist methodology, which states, to accurately explain society, it is necessary to use a scientific abstraction methodology. That is, it is necessary to start from the material relations of production of society in order to analyze various other aspects of that society. Principle 3. Society is a natural historical process of social development governed by objective laws. This principle of social formation theory is rooted in dialectical materialist principles and develops, which states, development is a process that comes from within the thing in itself. The process of development is inevitable, objective, and occurs without independence on human will. Engels wrote in Dialectics of Nature. Hey, who's in here? I'm gonna bring this guy up. This is a person from Gaza.
Hello.
Hello. As Engels wrote in Dialectics of Nature, motion is the most general sense conceived as a mode of existence. The inherent attribute of matter comprehends all changes and processes occur in the universe, from mere change of place right up to thinking. The whole of nature, accessible to us, forms a system, an interconnection totality of bodies, and by bodies we understand here all material existence extending from the stars to atoms, indeed right to each particle, insofar as one grants the existence of the last named. God, another one. This is for educational purposes only. Stars and atoms, indeed, right to either particles, insofar as one grants the existence of the last named. In the fact that these bodies are interconnected, it's already included that they react on one another, and it is precisely its mutual reaction that constitutes motion. Therefore follows that human society, like all other things, phenomena, and ideas, exist in a constant state of development, which stems from objective internal and external relationships. This leads to the principle of social formation, which states that the motion of development of society is a natural historical process. That is to say, social development is a process that takes place according to the objective laws and not according to human subjective will. This is the basis of the third rule of historical materialist methodology, which states, in order to properly understand and effectively solve social problems, it is necessary to study deeply the laws of motion and development of society. Applications of the methodology of historical materialism. I don't know why I keep getting fucking taken. It's fucking annoying. Jesus. Like yesterday, I didn't get anything. I didn't get any restrictions. None. Zero. This is like only to read. I'm just reading TikTok. God. It must be pointed out that the applications of the methodology of historical materialism, following the rules outlined above, constitutes the methodology of historical materialism. In order to properly practice this methodology in the analyzing of human society, it is crucial to thoroughly and deeply understand the principles of social economic formation theory and their basis in dialectical materialist philosophy. When we adhere to the rules of historical materialism and the principles of social formation theory, we can be assured that our analysis of human society can be placed upon a scientific basis which aligns with the philosophical worldview and methodology of dialectical materialism. A solid understanding of social economic formation theory is also an important prerequisite to the studying and pursuing of programs of scientific socialism, which serves as the basis for an organized political process bringing about social revolution. It must be pointed out that the historical materialist methodology cannot replace more specific methods used in the study of each specific field of society. Lenin once taught that materialism in history has never claimed to explain everything, but merely to indicate the only scientific methods of explaining history. Dialectical materialism is a universal philosophy This means that dialectical materialism can be used to study and analyze all things, phenomena, and ideas in existence. Historical materialism is the application of dialectical materialist philosophy and methodology specifically to study and analyze of human society. Other scientific fields, such as the study of physics, medicine, astronomy, and so on, may be analyzed and interpreted through an application of dialectical materialist philosophy. But historical materialism is solely focused on the study of the development and existence of humanity. The three principles of social formation theory and the three rules of historical materialist analysis is derived from the universal principles of dialectical materialism as applied to the specific study of human society and its development and history. Social formation theory is useful for understanding the objective laws which govern the development of humanity, and the three rules of historical materialist methodology are useful in the application of historical materialism to specific inquiries into human society and its historical development. Together, social formation and theory and the methodology of historical materialism enables a socialist to accurately study and understand all of humanity, as well as specific groups of human beings within society, both in our modern contemporary times and throughout history. Chapter 5. Anybody have any questions before I move on? Try I move on to chapter 5. Any questions? Guess I didn't win this appeal. Any questions? All right. Doesn't look like there's any questions yet. No questions. Okay. Chapter 5. The roles of class struggle and social revolutions in the motion and development of class society. Section 1. Class and the role of class struggle in the development of the class society. Number 1. Definition of class. In a great beginning, Lenin gave his definition of class. Classes are large groups of people differing from each other by the place they occupy in a historical determined system of social production, but their relations, in most cases fixed and formulated in law, to the means of production by their role of the social organization of labor, and consequently by the dimensions of the share of social wealth of which they dispose, and the mode of requiring it. According to the above definition, division of people in a social community into different and opposing classes is essentially caused by difference in status of different groups within a certain system of social production, and opposition between those groups within that system. These differences in status and opposition inevitably lead to one class being able to appropriate the labor of another. Thus, Lenin asserted, classes are groups of people, one of which can appropriate the law of another, owing to the different places they occupied in different definite system of social economy. The essence of class division in a society is the division of people in a social community into the exploiters and the exploited. The reality of human history over the past few millennia has proven that division into opposing classes constitutes exploitation through appropriation of labor throughout history. Slave owners exploited slaves in ancient history. Landlords exploited serfs in the medieval period. And the bourgeoisie exploits the proletariat during modern times. History has also proven that the class which holds the means of production within society occupies the position of mastery of political power and state power. This class, which controls the means of production, will objectively become the dominant class of society and will appropriate the labor of other classes. Through this domination of political and state power, this ruling class enables to maintain a relatively stable society in the context of class antagonism. The state is a social institution which allows the ruling class to exploit and appropriate the labor of oppressed classes through violence and coercion. The state is also the social institution that has the greatest impact on the base by constructing and controlling the state. The ruling class is able to maintain and stabilize its position of domination over the rest of human society and control of the means of production. Throughout history, the only way a ruling class has fallen out of power is through the process of social revolution. In the process of social revolution, an emerging progressive class takes over the previous ruling class, an act of dialectical negation, and ultimately establish a new state which it controls. Social revolution thus constitutes the development of a new social economic formation, which has its own class structure. All right, we got some pictures. Hopefully it's okay. I don't know if I'm not getting a lot of coins. Wait, I have coins. Hold on. There's that one. I forgot I have coins, my bad. Let's do this. I'll do 10. And I'll do 10. And I'll save the rest. There we go. All right. Oh, God. Off. Okay. So here. Oh. Working class. Okay. And then we have working class, the capital class, class struggle. Boom. Progressive workers develop class consciousness of the working class. I'm going to get flagged probably. Oh well. Working class, capitalist class, social revolution. Development of class consciousness eventually leads to social revolution. Number 3. Working class controls worker state, controls capitalist class. The working class builds a workers' state, a dictatorship of the proletariat. Then down here, stateless, classless society. Worker state, boom. Once capitalism has been negated completely, the state is no longer needed. The stateless, classless society is established. So whoever tells you that it's not stateless, classless society doesn't know what they're talking about. The historical, once capitalism has been, the historical mission of the working class is to end class society through social revolutions. In order, a dictatorship of the proletariat must be established through social revolution. This means establishing a worker state which exists to further the agenda of the working class and to give workers control over the means of production. Once this process of social revolution is complete and all remnants of the capitalist base and superstructure have been negated, there will remain only one class, the united global proletariat. At this point, all the humans of the world will collectively control the means of production as a united whole. This will constitute the end of class society altogether, and there will no longer be any need for a state to exist. As Lenin wrote in State and Revolution, the state is a special cohesive force, and from it follows that the special cohesive force for the suppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie of millions of working people by handful of the rich must be replaced by a special cohesive force for the suppression of the bourgeoisie by the proletariat, the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is precisely what is meant by abolishing of the state as state. This is precisely the act of taking possession of the means of production in the name of society. This is the mission of the working class, to build class consciousness, to enact social revolution, to build a worker state, a dictatorship of the proletariat, and to eventually bring about the end to not just capitalism, but class society altogether, and the development of the stateless, classless society. The pursuit of this mission is the principal pursuit of scientific socialism. Interesting, huh, everybody? According to this definition, class is not merely a concern of political science alone, but it also reflects the objective relationships of the political, economic, of the Yeah, where was I at? I just lost my, of the political and economic field of society based on the following characteristics. Class society, let me make sure, hold on, I'm looking down. Class reflects the objective relationships between the political and the economy of a society. Class also reflects the political economic relations between groups of human beings in certain historical conditions. Class shows not just the difference, but also the opposition of human groups in terms of political and economics. Sure, Khadija, I'll do you. I don't have much. I don't have much. I only have this much.
Assalamu alaikum.
It's all I have, my friend. It's all I got. Sorry. Therefore, hold on. Class, okay, let me read this. Class reflects the objective relationship between the political and the economy of society. Class also reflects the political economic relationship between groups of human beings of certain historical conditions. Class shows not just the difference, but also the opposition of human groups in terms of political and economics. Therefore, the analysis of problems of political structure needs to be associated with the analysis of the economic structure of society from a historical point of view. In dialectical materialism, all things, phenomena, and ideas are defined in terms of internal and external relationships. Class, therefore, is defined by various internal and external relationships. The three primary relationships which defines class include the relationship between politics and economy of society. Politics encompass aspects of society, superstructure related to control over and benefit from the state. Economics includes processes and phenomena which are concerned with securing, providing, and distributing the material needs of life in human society. Class and class society emerge from a dialectical relationship between politics and economy in human society. Historically, whenever one group of human beings come to exploit the labor of others, class society began. The state and political consciousness arose from the objective needs to stabilize society and to secure the position of ruling classes over oppressed classes through violence and coercion. Got another picture, everybody. Let's work on this. So here we go. I don't know why they do this. Working class, class struggle, capitalist class, means of production. So that's the state, that's the economic base, that's the superstructure. These two are fighting for that and that. Then you have this, and you have working class, capitalist class, means of production, material needs of society, economics, politics, economics. So that's the means of production. That's the superstructure, the state and everything, I think. Let's look down here. In class society, politics and economy exist in dialectical unity. Economy encompasses the material production process, while politics encompass class struggle, political economic relations between groups of human beings. Any questions yet? All right, I'm gonna take that as a no. One-on-one class for sure. Political economic relationships between groups and human beings. The most important relationship between groups of human beings within class society have to do with the means of production. Such political economic relationships include the relationship which a group of human beings has with the means of production. Some classes own the means of production while others labor and operate the means of production. The relationship which one group of human beings has with another group as it pertains to the means of production. Within a class society, some groups of human beings appropriate the labor of other groups of human beings and force them to operate the means of production while withholding ownership and control over the means of production. Under feudalism, Some classes, monarchs, feudal lords, religious clergies, etc., owned land. At this time, land was the most important means of production. These feudal landlords forced peasants to work on the land. This was a primary political economic relationship in the feudal era. Under capitalism, the primary political economic relationship is between the capitalist class and the working class. Capitalists own the means of production while workers must operate the means of production in order to survive. Capitalists profit from this relationship and enforces these class relations through the control of the state. Oppositional relationships between groups and human beings. Liberal and metaphysical interpretations of class might define classes based on different characteristics such as level of income, wealth, and so on. Historical materialism is the application of dialectical materialism, demanding that we define economic classes of human beings by identifying the dialectical contradictions which exist between them. In class society, different classes compete, struggle, and oppose each other to benefit from the means of production. This process of contradictions and development lead over time to process of negation, whereby new classes develop and overtake other classes. We call this contradiction the opposition between classes and class struggle. Historical perspectives of politics and economics. Dialectical materialism demands that we seek a comprehensive and historical perspective in the analysis of all things, phenomena, and ideas. In the analysis of class society, this means understanding the political opposition which exists between all classes within society, as well as the development which leads to those conditions. For example, in order to understand the political structure of capitalism, we must understand feudalism, which preceded it. One must understand not just the nature of capitalist-controlled states of modern society, but also the manner in which the bourgeoisie state emerged from feudal societies. The more deeply we understand the political relationship of the class struggle which underlies political struggle, the more accurate our understanding will be, and the more effective our activities which are based upon this understanding. In order to correctly analyze and solve problems of political structures of society, it is necessary not to only master the concepts of class from the Marxist-Leninist viewpoint, but also to master the concept of social stratification. The concept of social stratification refers to grouping people within the same class according to their specific status and differences in that class, such as blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, expert workers, etc. On the other hand, this concept is also used to refer to groups of people outside the class structure in a certain society, such as civil servants, intellectuals, small farmers, etc. These social stratas all have different relationships within different classes in society. Each class within every class society is defined by internal and external relationships. This means that no class is monolithic or homogeneous. Rather, every class is defined by internal relationships between internal strata of that class. Here, a stratum simply refers to a defined group within a class which has a certain stable form. Strata is primarily defined by the relationship within a class, between classes, and with the means of production. For instance, in feudal society, there was a different strata of peasants. Some peasants owned their own small holdings of land. This was a different stratum from the majority of peasants who worked the land which belonged to the feudal lord. But they were all essentially a part of the same class. Under capitalism, workers can be further divided into various stratas depending on their specific relationships to the means of production. For instance, blue-collar factory workers who work on the factory assembly line are a different stratum from the white-collar engineers who design the factory machines and systems. Both groups are part of the same class, the proletariat, because both sell their labor to capitalists for wages. However, one stratum, the blue-collar workers, directly operate the means of production, generally require less education, are typically paid less, etc. There are other ways to examine a classified strata within a class depending on the point of view of analysis in which relationships are being examined. For example, in some cultures, the nation's relationship having to do with ethnicity, race, language, caste, or other such factors may play an important or defining roles in understanding and distinguishing stratifications of classes. It is common for tensions and conflicts to exist between different stratas of the working class, and this must be understood in analyzing class conflicts in class society. This can be leveraged in class struggle. For instance, capitalists in our current society commonly set different stratas of the working class against each other to weaken and divide the proletariat. Stratification can also be defined by how members of a class relate specifically to the means of production. For example, is the stratification which Karl Marx, Frederick Engels, and Vladimir Lenin describes, which exists between intellectual laborers and manual laborers. Intellectuals are human beings who perform labor in the realm of human and social consciousness. Any human being who works to develop, disseminate, and interpret ideas can, therefore, be considered an intellectual. Intellectuals can serve a wide variety of roles of human society, including writers, artists, journalists, teachers, medical physicians, lawyers, and so on. Ideologists are a specific type of intellectuals who perform a political role in society. These are intellectuals who specifically work to develop and disseminate the ideology of a particular political party or movement which serve a particular economic class. Intellectual laborers are workers who are exploited for profit by capitalists and earn wages by laboring primarily through mental activities. This distinguishes them from most other laborers who work by directly operating the means of production. Intellectuals and class structure. Bureaucrats. Yep. Intellectuals can belong to any economic class. In our current capitalist society, there are intellectuals in the working class, capitalist class, and in the petite bourgeoisie. If a worker receives wages for performing intellectual labor, they are considered to be intellectual laborers. Many intellectuals do not get paid for their intellectual labor. For instance, a factory line worker might run a blog for producing short films as a hobby or side project. In this case, the factory worker would be an intellectual, but not an intellectual laborer. Intellectuals may also serve the class interests of different classes than the one they occupy. For example, Frederick Engels was a member of the bourgeoisie because his family owned many factories, businesses, operations throughout Europe. However, Engels worked as an intellectual for the working class, making him a proletarian ideologist despite being a capitalist. Likewise, there are many workers who perform intellectual labor who serve the agenda for the bourgeoisie. For these bourgeois ideologists perform their labor for wages and are exploited by capitalists. For example, journalists who write articles to further the agenda of the capitalist class in exchange for wages are simultaneously intellectual laborers because they are exploited as wage laborers. Bourgeoisie ideologists because they develop political ideology for the capitalist class. This makes the analysis of intellectuals, ideology, and human beings who perform intellectual labor quite complex. In the West, this complexity has led to much confusion over intellectuals, ideologues, and intelligentsias, etc. And their roles in class society is confusion. This confusion tends to be related to two factors: semantics and class structure analysis. Common Too much waffle? Common misunderstandings about intellectuals in class society. Any questions? All right. Common misunderstandings about intellectuals in class society. Semantics is a philosophical field of inquiry that pertains to the meaning of language. Semantics can lead to confusion and disagreement when different people have strong preferences about different definitions of words. This is especially problematic in a metaphysical philosophy, which seeks to categorize all human knowledge into discrete, static, unchanged specific categories. Metaphysical semantics generally seek to assign a very specific definition to every individual word. These metaphysical definitions are based on categorization and characteristics. Thus, in the metaphysical philosophical analysis, the word intellectual might only have one specific definition, which is rooted in a set of criteria, and where intellectuals would fit into metaphysical categorization. Dialectical materialism semantics differ from metaphysical semantics in a key way. Dialectical materialism analysis words are discussed and defined based on internal and external relationships. This means that dialectical materialist analysis demands that language be considered, not just in relations to other words, but also in relations to various other factors such as, here we go. Well, I guess that dude was gone. Wonder why that. The human beings who use the language. Different people might use the same words differently in different contexts. For example, the way a computer programmer uses the word virus in daily speech might be different than how a medical doctor uses the same word. The real phenomenon that are being described. I'm going to see what they said to get. How does the moneyless system function? It's based on need. read the source materials. The real world phenomenon that are being described. As the phenomenon change in the real world, the language itself might also change, or the meaning of the same word might change. For example, the word drive used in a modern context is usually associated with the operation of an automobile. But this was not the case before the invention of widespread use of automobiles. Oh, Yahtzee, okay. No worries. I trust you. Who's this? All right. For instance, hold on, automobiles. In dialectical materialist analysis, it is important to avoid problems of metaphysical semantics, which can lead to unnecessary confusion or even intentional ossification and description when used in bad faith. This was especially been a problem with the use of language surrounding intellectuals, intelligentsias, and ideologues, and so on in bourgeois philosophical, political analysis, as well as words such as class. For instance, when Lenin refers to intellectual class, he clearly uses word class in the sense of category. The word class is used here does not exclusively refer to economic class as it pertains to the class structure of the material base of political economy. This is evident because economic class is defined by relations between economic classes and relations with the means of production. The fact that intellectual labor can serve both the political functions and the economic functions make the analysis of intellectuals and the relationships of class society confusing, especially when muddled by metaphysical analysis. This confusion can be easily cleared up by looking at the underlying relationship which define the development intellectuals and intellectual labor. Intellectual labor may or may not define someone as a working class member of the proletariat. Whether or not an intellectual would be considered a worker or not depends on their relations to the means of production, i.e., whether or not they owned their own essential means of production, or whether or not they are wage workers who are exploited by capitalist profits. Marx and Engels and Lenin all wrote of intellectual labor and an intellectual proletariat, which refers to workers who primarily work with their minds and do not directly interface with the essential means of production in their labor. These workers are still part of the working class. They are just a different stratum of the working class and serve a different role in the functioning of capitalism. Thus, it can be understood that some workers are intellectual workers. Some members of the capitalist class, such as Engels, can be political intellectuals who intellectually serve the working class, and so on. This can be easily understood when the underlying relationship which these words represent are properly understood. Rather, a human being should be considered an intellectual, and how the status of intellectual relates to the political economy and class structure must be explored through proper dialectical materialist analysis, which consider all things, phenomena, and ideas as constantly changing, as defined by the internal and external relationship which leads to those changes. Metaphysical semantics have been used to distort what Marx, Engels, and Lenin and other dialectical materialist philosophers have meant by intellectuals, intellectual class, etc. These distortions of misunderstanding are easily to clear up with proper dialectical materialist analysis and proper applications of materialist dialectics and historical materialist principles. How much of the notes? Because that's a lot to go through. I don't know. I don't want to. I don't know. How much? Because that's a lot of notes. There's a lot of stopping points. Yeah, I think there's a lot. Yeah. Let's do it next time. Since we're already deep into this. Is that okay? Are you okay? Hello? You okay? Everything okay? Okay, thank you. Further clarification of the role of intellectuals from Marx, Engels, and Lenin. Okay, good. In a letter to the International Socialist Student Congress written in 1893, Engels explained the importance of an intellectual proletariat. May your efforts succeed in the development among students, the awareness that it is from their ranks that there must emerge intellectual proletariat, which will be called on to play a considerable part in the approaching revolution alongside and among their brothers and manual workers. The bourgeoisie revolution of the past asked nothing of the universities, but lawyers as the best raw material for their politicians. The emancipation of the working class needs, in addition, doctors, engineers, chemists, agronomists, and other experts, for we are faced with taking over the running not only of the political machine, but of all social production. And in that case, what will be needed is not fine words, but well-grounded knowledge. Here it is clear that Engels interprets the intellectual proletariat as workers who perform intellectual labor. In the German ideology, Karl Marx also explicitly defines mental labor and manual labor as two stratas of the working class which are intentionally divided and set against each other by the ruling class. The division of labor, which we already saw above as one of the chief forces of history, up till now manifests itself also in the ruling class as the division of mental and material labor, so that outside this class one part appears as the thinkers of the class, its active, conceptive ideologists who make the perfecting of the illusion of the class about itself their chief source of livelihood, while the other's attitude to these ideas and illusions are more passive and receptive, because they are in reality the active members of this class and have less time to make up illusions and ideas about themselves. Within this class, this cleavage can even develop into a certain opposition and hostility between the two parts, which, however, in the case of a practical collision in which the class itself is endangered, automatically comes to nothing, in which case there also vanishes the semblance that the ruling ideas were not the ideas of the ruling class and had a power distinct from the power of this class. The existence of the revolutionary ideas in a particular period presupposes the existence of a revolutionary class about the premises. For the latter, sufficient has already been said above. Who are you talking to? Okay. Isn't someone else now? Jeez. One step forward and two step back. Lenin further discussed the divide between intellectuals and manual laborers using slightly different language. The problem that again interests us so keenly today is the antagonism between the intelligentsia and the proletariat. My colleague, Kautsky, is himself an intellectual, a writer, an editor, will mostly be indignant that I admit is this antagonism, but it actually exists, and as in other cases, it would be the most expedient tactic to try to overcome the fact by denying it. This antagonism is a social one. It relates to classes, not to individuals. The individual intellectual, like the individual capitalist, may identify himself with the proletariat in its class struggle. When he does, he changes his character too. It is not this type of intellectual, who is still an exception among his class, that he shall mainly speak of in what follows. Unless otherwise stated, I shall use the word intellectual to mean only the common run of intellectuals who takes the stand of bourgeoisie society and who is characteristics of the intelligentsia as a class. This class stands in a certain antagonism to the proletariat. Reading this paragraph alone, it may be interpreted to mean that Lenin is defining an intellectual class in the economic sense, which would make intellectual workers a complete different part of the class structure of capitalism, separated from the working class. However, Lenin immediately specifies that he is talking about political contradictions, not economic contradictions of class structure. This antagonism differs, however, from the antagonism between labor and capital. The intellectual is not a capitalist. True, his standard of life is bourgeoisie, and he must maintain if he is not to become a pauper. But at the same time, he's compelled to sell the product of his labor, and often his labor power, and is himself often enough exploited and humiliated by the capitalist. Hence, the intellectual does not stand in any economic antagonism to the proletariat, but his status of life and his conditions of labor are not proletariat, and this gives rise to a certain antagonism and a sentiments and ideas. In other words, Lenin was pointing out superstructural contradictions and characteristics which cause intellectual laborers to have a general tendency of antagonism with the working class. In other words, Lenin is attempting to explain why intellectuals of all classes within a capitalist political economy have a strong tendency to serve the agenda of the ruling class, and how this tendency tends to lead to conflict and antagonism between intellectuals and the majority of the working class. Lenin did not dismiss Marx and Engels in their conception of intellectual laborers and an intellectual proletariat. On the contrary, he is further developing these ideas and attempting to further explain the complexity of class relations and divisions which exist between different stratas of the working class, which Marx had previously identified in the German ideology. In Lenin's explanation, intellectual laborers are a special stratum of the working class, which have unique properties. Namely, intellectual workers do not have a direct relationship with the means of production like manual laborers, such as, for example, factory workers. Instead, they tend to occupy an indeterminating role between the ruling class and the vast majority of workers. This means that intellectuals have a tendency to side with whichever class will give them the most benefits, and this leads to an overwhelming tendency to intellectual supporting the ruling class. This is not always the case, of course. Lenin himself was an intellectual, but he served the proletarian class with his intellectual labor. This means that Lenin's intellectual had to use his own words, a proletarian characteristic. To put it another way, Lenin was a proletarian ideologist because he developed and furthered the ideology of the proletariat as a revolutionary class. Lenin, Marx, and Engels all identified the tendencies of division between intellectual laborers and manual laborers within the working class. There are many classes of this division. Thank you for being here, though, Joe. The state, as stated, intellectuals tend to receive many benefits from serving the interests of the bourgeoisie. On the other hand, openly supporting proletarian revolution can lead to a significant economic hardship and many other difficulties for intellectuals. In the capitalist society, intellectuals tend to receive their educations from institutions which are funded, controlled, and owned by the ruling class. Likewise, in capitalist societies, intellectual institutions such as the media outlets, social media platforms, and information sources also tend to be owned and controlled by the ruling class, meaning that most ideas which intellectuals are exposed to on a daily basis will tend to be ideas that serve the interests of the ruling class. Despite these difficulties, there have been many examples of intellectuals who have risen above this tendency. It is important to properly understand the role and nature of intellectuals. This is because the primary prerequisite of social revolution, which will lead to the end of class society, is the development of class consciousness, as discussed. This means that the proletariat's ideologists must develop an effective revolutionary proletarian class ideology, and to popularize this proletarian ideology among the working class. Some of these ideologists might be capitalists, like Friedrich Engels. Others might be intellectual workers, like von Neuenge Gip, the great general of the political leader of Vietnam, who was a school teacher. Many others will be proletarian ideologists who began as manual laborers, such as Ton Doc Thong, the leader of Vietnam's first union, who went on to become an important ideologist and political leader of Vietnam's revolution. Others, like Ho Chi Minh, may develop a change over time. Ho Chi Minh began as a dishwasher, a sailor, then became a journalist, a writer, and went on to become the ideological leader of the Vietnam's entire revolutionary movement. In the development of social revolution, revolutionary intellectuals must rise above the tendency of antagonism between working class intellectuals and working class material production laborers, just as they must undo all other tensions and fractures which divide the working class. Solidification of the proletariat into a class-conscious revolutionary movement for social revolution leads to an end of capitalism and class society. 2. Origins of class. Who's in here? Who's this? Origins of class. The discovery of class antagonism, and class struggles were not a new discovery in Marxist-Leninism. However, one of the new and fundamental findings of Marxism-Leninism was that class antagonism, and class struggle are neither a nature of humanity nor a precedent. I can't say this word. I gotta go look it up. Right back. I got it. It's predestined. Predestined laws, but only the historical phenomenon. Marx asserted that the existence of class is only bound up with particular historical phases in the development of production. The direct original origin of class division in society is the birth and existence of the private ownership of the means of production, especially private ownership of the primary means of production in society. Thus, private ownership of the means of production leads to the possibility that one group may appropriate surplus labor from another. However, private ownership of the means of production alone is not sufficient to give rise to the separation into classes within society. Another prerequisite is that productive forces be developed in such an extent that labor productivity increases, which gives rise to the development of surplus labor time, which manifests as excess wealth within society. There have existed in the past, and even exist today, various human societies which are not class societies. In these societies, the means of production are held in common, and human beings are not divided up into different classes. This shows that class society is not a fixed characteristics of human nature. By studying the development of human society with a comprehensive and historical perspective, Marx and Engels discovered that class society emerged. Go lay down. emerged from the material and objective processes related to the development of productive forces and corresponding relations of production. Class society emerged as productive forces reached a level where private ownership of the primary means of production became the most suitable relationship of production. The primary means of production are the means of production which are most vital for producing the material necessities of human life. Precisely what constitutes the primary means of production changes as productive forces develop. For example, in feudal times, the land was the primary means of production. Today, the primary means of production include not just land, but factories, machines, and other components of modern industrial infrastructure. Class society emerged from the development of surplus labor time. Marx defines surplus labor time as capital, as the time which the worker spends laboring after producing enough labor value to account for their own reproduction. To put it another way, surplus labor time is all the time a worker works in excess of the value of that worker's wages. Surplus labor time is a source of profit, which allows a member of the ruling class to benefit in an exploitative manner from the labor of the oppressed working class. Surplus labor time generates surplus value. Surplus value generates profit for the ruling class, which owns the means of production. Marx explains in Capital that surplus labor is what distinguishes one mode of production from another in the development of human society. The essential differences between the various economic forms of society, between, for instance, a society based on slave labor and one based on wage labor, lies only in the mode of which this surplus labor is in each case extracted from and actually producers and laborers. This means that over time, as productive forces develop, their stability with the current relations of production decrease more and more. This means that eventually, once the insuitability reaches a certain threshold, the mode of production will end and another will take its place. In the capitalist era, the productive forces continuously become increasingly unsuitable to the relations of production of capitalism. Eventually, this will lead to social revolution, whereby the working class will take control of society and unseat the capitalist class as the ruling class of society. This will, in effect, end the private ownership of the means of production and class society altogether. And only alternative to this outcome, as stated by Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, is collective ruin. Free men and slave patricians and plebeians, lords and serfs, guildmasters and journeymen, in a word, oppressors and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolution, constitution, or of society at large, or in a common ruin of the contending classes. Furthermore, private ownership of the means of production is not subject to human subjective will, but rather to an objective law, the law of suitability between relations of production and productive forces. Therefore, the root origins of class division is an inefficient and socialization of the productive forces. When the productive forces reach a high level of socialization, it will become the objective cause of the abolition of private ownership of the means of production, and will thus lead to the end of class antagonism, and class struggle in society. This constitutes a particular matter of socialism, especially as it pertains to the mission of building future communist society. I got a little note I'm going to read. Marx used the term reproduction to refer to the process which allows someone or something to maintain their own existence. In this case, capitalists seek to provide workers with only a bare minimum of wages that would allow the workers to survive and continue working for the capitalists. Workers simultaneously struggle for better benefits from the means of production. This is the basis of political class struggle under capitalism. So in social, let's see here go. Not good. In socialism, utopian and scientific, Engels describes how the operations of the productive forces had become a socialized process under capitalism. Before capitalist production, i.e. in the Middle Ages, the system of petty industry obtained generally based upon the private property and of the laborers in the means of production. In the country, the agriculture of the small peasants, freemen and serfs, in the towns and handicrafts organized in guilds, the instruments of labor, land, agriculture, implements, the workshops and the tools, or the instruments of labor of single individuals adapted for the use of one worker, and therefore, of necessity, small, dwarfish, circumscribed. But for this very reason, they belong to, as a rule, to the producers himself. In other words, previous modes of productions which existed in class societies before capitalism had much lower development of productive forces. The means of production were limited and underdeveloped, so that the workers who used them tend to own and use them as individuals. This meant that the operations of the productive forces were far more individualized in those preceding societies, and the socialization of production is quite limited. Engels describes how the development of capitalism and the development of productive forces led to the socializations of productive forces, meaning that the means of production began to acquire increasingly concentrated and collectivized operations and use. As industrial processes, factories, complex machineries, and other development in the productive forces developed, it became impossible for individuals to own and operate individual means of production. In order to be competitive in a society which had become increasingly dominant by the capitalist mode of production, it became necessary for many human beings to work together to operate the means of production. Simultaneously, these more socialized and collectivized means of production came to be owned privately by a smaller and smaller number of capitalists. Engels writes, to concentrate these scattered, limited means of production, to enlarge them, to turn them into the powerful levers of production of the present day. This is precisely the historical role of the capitalist production and of its upholders, the bourgeoisie. In the fourth section of Capital, Marx has explained in detail how since the 15th century this has been historically worked out through the three phases of simple cooperations, manufactures, and modern industry. But the bourgeoisie, as is shown there, could not transform these puny means of production into mighty productive forces without transforming them at the same time from means of production of the individuals into social means of production, only workable by the collectivity of men. The spinning wheel, the hand loom, the blacksmith's hammer, or replaced by spinning machines and power looms, the steam hammer, in individual workshops, by the factory implying the cooperations of hundreds of thousands of workmen. In like manner, production itself changed from a series of individuals into a series of social acts, and the production from individuals to social products. The yarn, the cloth, the metal articles that now come out of the factory were the joint products of many workers through those hands they have successively to pass before they were ready. No one person could say to them, I made that. This is my product. Engels further elaborates that socialized productive forces in the capitalist mode of production gradually and steadily develop well beyond the productive forces of feudal societies and individualized productive forces. This meant that the older feudal mode of production could not hope to compete with a newly emerged capitalist mode of production, which produced material necessities and other goods far more efficiently, he states. In the midst of the old division of labor, grown up spontaneously and upon no definite plan, which had governed the whole of society, now arose division of labor upon the definite plan, as organized in the factories side by side with individual production, appeared social production. The products of both were sold in the same market and therefore at prices at least proximately equal, but organization upon a definite plan was stronger than spontaneous division of labor. The factories working with the combined social forces of collectivity of individual produced their commodities far more cheaply than the individual small producers. Individual producers succumbed to one department after another. Socialized production revolutionized all the old modes of production. Engels also highlights that through the means of production came to be used by workers on the socialized basis. The means of production continued to be owned privately by certain individuals, the emerging capitalist class. This was the basis for the development of the two primary classes of capitalism, the bourgeoisie, who owned the means of production, and the proletariat, who operated the means of production. Engels explains, then came the concentration of the means of production of the producers in large workshops and manufactories. Their transformation into actual socialized means of production, the socialized producer, but the socialized producer and the means of production and their products were still treated after this change, just as they had been before, i.e., as the means of production and the products of individuals. Hitherto, the owners of the instruments of labor had himself appropriated the products because, as a rule, it is his own products and the assistance of others who was the exception. Now the owner of the instruments of labor always appropriated to himself the product, although it is no longer his product, but exclusively the product of the labor of others. Thus, the product now produced socially were not appropriated by those who actually set in motion the means of production. They actually produced the commodities, but by the capitalists. The means of production and the production itself had become in essence socialized, but they were subjected to the form of appropriation, which presupposes the private production of individuals, under which therefore everyone owns his own product and brings it to market. The mode of production is subjected to this form of appropriation, although it abolishes the conditions upon which the latter rests. Engels identifies a dialectical contradictions between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, arising from the fact that the operations of the means of production has become socialized, with the ownership of the means of production remaining individualized. This contradiction means that the productive forces of capitalist society are unsuitable with capitalist relations of production. He writes, this contradiction, I gotta look ahead. This contradiction, which gives to the new mode of production its capitalistic character, contains the germ of the whole of the social antagonism of today. The greater and mystery obtained by the new mode of production over all important fields of production and in all manufacturing countries, and more to reduce individual production to an insignificant residuum, and more clearly was brought out the incompatibility of socialized production with the capitalistic appropriation. Let me look at something real quick. 231. Come on. Oh my God. 231. Nope. I have to stop sometime. So I gotta find a stopping point. 231. Okay. Let's find a stopping point somewhere. All right. The development of the capitalist mode of production eventually negated the feudal mode of production. However, the contradictions of unsuitability between the socialized productive forces and the individual ownership of the means of production was led to inherent instability and class struggle within capitalist society. Engels describes this transformation. The first capitalists found, as we have said, alongside of other forms of labor, wage labor, ready-made for them on the market, but it is exceptional, complementary, accessory, transitory labor, wage labor. The agricultural labor, through upon occasion, he hired himself out by the day, had a few acres of his own land, on which he could, at all events, live at a pinch. The guilds were so organized that the journeyman of today became the master of tomorrow. But all this changed. As soon as the means of production became socialized and concentrated in the hands of the capitalists, the means of production as well as the products of the individual producers became more and more worthless. There was nothing left for him but to turn wage workers under the capitalist. Wage labor, for aforetime the exception and accessory, now became the rule and the basis of all production. Aforetime complementary, it now became the sole remaining function of the worker. The wage worker for a time became a wage worker for life. The number of these permanent was further enormously increased by the breakup of the feudal system that occurred at the same time by the disbanding of the rentiers, of the feudal lords, the evictions of the peasants from their homestead, etc. A separation was made completely between the means of production concentrated in the hands of the capitalists on the one side and the producers possessing nothing but their labor power on the other. The contradictions between socialized production and the capitalistic appropriation manifests itself as an antagonism of the proletarian and bourgeoisie. Whew. Okay. So here we got the working class socially operated. Socially operated, the means of production. Then you have the private owned capitalist production. Capitalist relations of production. Under capitalism, the means of production are socially operated by the working class, yet privately owned by the capitalist class. This is the core internal contradiction of capitalism. Let's see here. Finally, Engels summarized the inevitable solution to this contradiction. Socialized ownership of the means of production, which can be accomplished through proletarian social revolution. He describes such a social revolution as a solution of contradictions, including proletarian revolution, solution of the contradiction. The proletarian seizes the public owner, the public power, and by means of this transforms the socialized means of production, slipping from the hands of the bourgeoisie into the public property. By this act, the proletariat frees the means of production from the character of capital they have thus far borne, and gives their socialized character complete freedom to work itself out. Socialized production upon the predetermined plan becomes henceforth possible. The development of production makes the existence of different classes of society thenceforth an anachronism. In portions of anarchy in social production vanishes. The political authority of the state dies out. Man, at last, the master of his own form of social organization, becomes at the same time the lord over nature, is his own master, free to accomplish this act of universal emancipation in a historical mission of the modern proletariat, to thoroughly comprehend the historical conditions and thus the very nature of this act, to impart to the now oppressed proletarian class a full knowledge of the conditions and of the means of the momentous act it is called upon to accomplish. This is the task of the theoretical expression of the proletariat movement, scientific socialism. I'm trying to find a stopping point. I really am. That might be a good stopping point right there. All right, let's stop right here for right now. What we'll do is I'll go back some pages. So I'll go do that. Let's add a bookmark. 232. Jesus Christ, come on. Why is it not letting me delete this thing? Here we go. 232 is where we stopped. I give up? Why you give up? Oh, I see why you gave up. Do you have any summaries that you like to at least talk about? Anybody want to come up, ask questions?
Hello.
Next time we'll do the notes, okay, Joe? Promise.
I kept notes on this section, so when we finish this section, if you want, we can do the notes.
It's almost 8 o'clock already.
No, I don't mean tonight. I mean tomorrow when we finish the section.
We'll see.
Over all the
We'll
notes, and it'll catch us up to where we're at.
But that will take the whole time, won't it not?
No, it's just one section.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Do you have any questions, though, at all besides the notes? Do you have any questions at all?
It was pretty well
okay if you don't.
And I read along, so.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, then. Well, I will close it out, and we'll come back. And I don't know. I'm trying to think here. I got to remember where I'm at. Let's see. I'm looking ahead a little bit. See, there is a stopping point, but it's like 6 pages in.
Right. That's
I'm not going to go 6 pages extra. Yeah. Let's see here. I'm trying to see if there's another, if this is the last chapter or not. Real quick. No, there's another, that's not a chapter. It's just another section of the chapter. Oh, yeah, chapter 6. Jesus. It's a pretty long book. I like it. Are you going to also do this book too after you're done with the other book?
Yes.
Sweet. All right, let's go back up to 32. All right, then. We are done for the night. All right, everybody. I hope everybody has a good night. Sleep well.